Hello, friends. November 26th is celebrated as a Constitution Day. In that context, let's talk to Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan today. Hello, sir.
Hello, Ankit.
Sir, over the last couple of years, we've been hearing this, particularly from the opposition, that the Constitution is in danger. It was said it was a strong narrative during the Lok Sabha elections as well. So, do you see any real dangers to Constitution at this point in time?
These are very self-serving arguments. If I'm in power, everything is wonderful. If you're in power, everything is in a disaster.
Right.
Is what parties tend to say. Even in the US, you notice that tendency. Europe probably is a little less apocalyptic, a little more balanced in their approach. You should not take that seriously. But if you go deeper, because you asked me at this point of time,
Right.
but if you go deeper, overall framework of the Constitution and the application of the Constitution in India, let's be truthful. The major political parties believe in only two elements of the Constitution. They know that power comes from the people's vote. Somehow or other get the vote. Doesn't matter what means you adopt. Doesn't matter what promises you make, whether they're right or wrong, sustainable, unsustainable. Doesn't matter what methods that you engender, whether breaking up in caste, region, religion, vote buying, all kinds of things. But somehow get the seats. And two, the one who gets the majority of seats in the legislature becomes the king. These two things they perfectly understood. These two things they are implementing to the letter and perhaps to spirit. Of late, though, the spirit is missing, because if I'm losing, I'm saying it's all unconstitutional. Or election is rigged. Even that they are giving up, some of it. But barring that, if the Constitution has a grander goal, the people's empowerment, decentralization of power, rule of law, serving the people, we the people's tax money, and therefore people getting value for the money, the quality of life being improved with their money through policies and laws that the Constitution envisaged. Where are we there? So is Constitution only about elections and getting into power and surviving in power? Who commands a majority in the assembly or parliament? Or is there something more to it? If something more to it is there, I'm afraid over the years, across the spectrum, the political system has lost their sensitivity. The Constitution served us remarkably well. In a fractious, diverse society, unmatched diversity in the world, very ancient society, to bring everybody together and to protect the unity of India, to make us feel that we are under one umbrella, one country, and to give us in a hierarchical society, caste-ridden society, to make us feel that we all have equal rights, we are entitled to aspirations equally, and to help us in certain processes, like, for instance, integration of princely states, reorganization of states in a multilingual country. All these, the Constitution gave us fantastic opportunity and space. But of late, the Constitution is only used to somehow acquire power through the vote and retain power by whatever means, undermining the spirit of the Constitution. So in that sense, it's not enough to celebrate the Constitution. We must actually start looking deeper into the Constitution and implement the spirit of it. But to say that a party on a day is a threat, others are all upholding Constitution, is a self-serving hyperbole.
Right. So you said the Constitution has served us well in a couple of respects, and that's giving a fractious and diverse society a nation. The average lifespan of a written Constitution globally is about 19 or 20 years, thereabout. But we've had it for more than that. And also, going back in time during the independence, we had, like you mentioned, you had 500 princely states and we had multiple diverse societies. What exactly the role did the Constitution play in uniting us as a nation?
You see, there are several extraordinary things that happen in India because they happen so easily for us, we don't understand the value of it. Our nation builders, our Constitution framers are not people who simply sat in 1946 and finished the writing of the Constitution in 1949. They built the nation before that. For at least about 50 to 60 years, 60, 70 years. Post 1857, starting with 1860s, they assiduously built a sense of nationhood in a country completely torn by caste, region, religion, language, and all kinds of divisive impulses. First among the middle classes in the urban areas. Then slowly, with Mahatma Gandhi's advent into a great mass movement, Tilak first and Gandhiji later, mass movement. But even if people didn't understand the spirit of what the Constitution is about, some of the broader constitutional values that we have a right to govern ourselves, that each human being, irrespective of birth, is entitled to a space under the sun. We must be treated with dignity and respect. These are the ideas that percolated. On a sufficient scale, I'm not saying every individual embraced those ideas, but on a sufficient scale across the length and breadth of our society. And these are leaders with credibility. They are trusted. And they earn the trust by their sacrifice, by their hard work, by their intelligence, and their capacity to unite people. And that's why the constitution making became possible. There were intense debates, but very friendly debates. There was no acerbic approach. There was no anger. There was no hatred. There was no mistrust. Many of the constitutions you're talking about, they're hodgepodge. There's no trust. Even tiny countries like Lebanon, or otherwise very civilized rich countries like Belgium, there's no trust. In Belgium, the Flemish people don't trust the French people. They're roughly divided half-half in the country. Lebanon, tiny country, the Mennonite Christians, the Sunni Muslims, the Jewish people, some other stock, they don't trust each other. The Shia Muslims, they're fighting. Cyprus, a tiny country, Northern Cyprus, Southern Cyprus. Whereas India, with the diversity, it's a remarkable tribute to our founding fathers. Never underestimate that, the work done then. And then the first 10, 15 years, while economic policy we bungled very badly. In terms of building state institutions, remarkable work was done. The second great thing about our constitution is the flexibility. While the basics, the fundamentals are pretty clear, universal franchise, fundamental rights, electoral democracy, and so on and so forth, they're clear, and federalism. The detail is always open to change depending on the circumstances. That's why we amended the constitution more than 100 times without much fuss. Only once we amended to undermine the constitution, the 42nd Amendment during emergency. Otherwise, in large part, the political parties by consensus responded to the challenge of the situation and then amended from time to time. And here, there's one of the few areas where the Supreme Court acted very wisely. The Keshwananda Bharati judgment about the basic features of the Constitution. That is inviolable. You can amend it, but you can't kill the Constitution. That's a very wise judgment. Only thing wrong with that is the court refused to specify what are the basic features, so that they left it to themselves to decide what they want on arbitrary basis at any point of time. That is wrong. But the basic idea is right. And our political system actually adhered to that. So it is a flexibility. And third is, because of the political compulsions over time and economic compulsions, economic reform itself brought about certain change in our worldview. And the fact that multiple parties came to power in multiple states, regional parties, etc., federalism, at least at the state level, became very real. So we did not stop at the Constitution in 1950. The constitutional values actually percolated in some respects. While in some respects they declined, there's no doubt about it. In some respects they improved. India is much more federal today than it ever was. But there's a deficiency, because the Constitution itself is deficient. We never bothered about the third tier of federalism. Because of Dr. Ambedkar's mistrust of local caste elites, local governments never took roads. There was a simple answer to that challenge of caste elites. We should have created larger units than a traditional village, so that the democratic numbers rather than the caste hierarchies will dominate. Instead of looking at the solution, we made it a wishy-washy provision. And eventually, when we brought in the constitutional amendment, it was a very, very ill-thought-out amendment, well-meaning, but very poorly structured amendment, to create overstructured, underpowered local governments. So the third tier of federalism is not maturing. That's, in fact, the glaring weakness of our constitution and our democracy. But the second tier has become very, very strong. Mark my words, the future of India's states is in the states' hands. The state government matters in India. It's not the union government that matters. And that's the evolution in the last 30, 40 years. So in many ways, the Constitution stood the test of time. It doesn't mean that every word is sacrosanct.
Right.
We cannot change that. The founding fathers never wanted it. But Fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with the Constitution.
Right.
It's the right document with the right accent and the right issues. And if there are some things we need to correct it, like local governments, I believe we should strengthen. Certainly, Constitution does not preclude that.
So the popular opinion among the right wing finds issues with a couple of terms in the preamble, particularly socialism, secularism. How do you see that?
See, my friend Sharad Joshi, and my mentor and a great friend, he used to always argue that Jayaprakash, this word socialism, he was allergic to that word. Imported in the Constitution is completely wrong. No, we will never accept it, we'll fight. I used to laugh and tell him, you're fighting, tilting at windmills. You define socialism as what is socialism? One person may say socialism is controlling all the economy, government controlling all the economy and having monopoly. That's a dead philosophy. When we discarded that in 1991, almost the whole sensible world has discarded it. But my socialism is giving every child an opportunity irrespective of the caste and birth. Every child getting quality education, quality healthcare, an opportunity to earn a decent living and live with dignity. If that is my socialism, I'm perfectly happy. Define it in your way. Why are you fighting that? See, in a large and complex country, there are so many things to change. We must focus on the critical things that actually make an impact on people's lives. If we all have a bee in the bonnet and then waste our energies on trivia, which have no consequences in terms of outcomes, I think we are being less than practical. So I don't think these words matter. Secularism is anyway embedded in the Constitution. The word may not have been there. Socialism was never embedded in the Constitution. If the socialism is understood as Soviet style of government, state monopoly is a nonsensical idea. If socialism is equal opportunity to everybody, it's a necessary idea, we must embrace it. So I don't think we should bother too much about one or two words here and there.
So certain sections of the political parties also feel that at this point, Constitution is limiting our growth or development, and we should make a new Constitution that suits our conditions as of now.
Ankit, it's absolutely not true. I cannot be more emphatic than this. What does the Constitution do? Constitution is not a miracle. If you chant the mantra, something great will happen. Constitution gives you a framework to govern yourselves, to organize yourselves. What to do with the ability to organize, what to do with governance is in your hands. The Constitution never tells you what to do. It tells you how to do. We're getting confused. The how to do part, it cannot be better than this. Yes, there are some areas where we require some improvements. And we brought about 104 or 105 improvements in the country. The Constitution deliberately gave that space. And the courts held that the basic structure cannot be offended, but you can amend as you please otherwise.
Right.
So to say that the Constitution has not worked or you require a new Constitution is an illogical argument. For instance, development you mentioned. What do you require for development? You require fiscal discipline. You require decentralization of power so that people understand where the money is going and what is happening with their money, so they have a sense of the future rather than simply consuming today. You require effective service delivery, education and healthcare in particular. You require good infrastructure. You require a bureaucracy performing for the sake of the people, not for itself. You require a political system that is honest, public-spirited. Tell me, what provision of the Constitution stopped you from doing any of these things? Earlier, we were not able to acquire land, we were not able to build roads. Now we are building 30 kilometers a day.
Right.
You didn't have to change the Constitution. Earlier, you had a state monopoly and you did not allow competition. Telephones were not allowed. Every basic needs are not met. There was always shortages and corruption. Today, after economic reform, you have plentiful of goods and services available, choices available, there's competition, market decides the price, market decides the quality, and you buy what you want, where you want. Where in the Constitution did it stop you from doing that? It is the stupidity of the political parties and governments in their policies, or in their laws, or in their actions. Now, where in the Constitution did it say you should not deliver quality education to every single child, irrespective of the circumstance of birth? You are not delivering. How will rewriting the Constitution improve the quality of education or quality of healthcare? Without improving those two, how are you going to improve equality in society? It's not the Constitution that is at fault. As I mentioned before, except to the extent of acquisition of power and retaining power, our elites never bothered about the spirit of the Constitution. The rest of the Constitution is generally we pay lip sympathy, we don't care. Only acquisition of power and retention of power, we take Constitution as sacrosanct. It is our failing, the elites failing in particular, the public servants failing, not the Constitution's failing. And yes, there are some changes required. Local governments, we incorporated in 73rd, 74th Amendments, well-meaning, but very poorly structured. I've always said they're overstructured, underfunded, and underpowered local governments. We made a mockery of them. We must make them effective. It is interpolation of the Constitution we did very badly. We can do it elegantly, like the German Constitution, Article 28, or like other constitutions. No constitution tells you how to elect a sarpanch. They tell you there must be local governments which are empowered, which are self-governing, which are autonomous and accountable. We did wrongly. It is not the framing of the Constitution that's wrong. It's our fault subsequently. And we never want to correct it. So much so that even in the earlier framework, when there were no local governments for a long period of time in most parts of the country, there were 28 chief ministers that rose from local governments. After this constitutional amendment, only one chief minister came, Devendra Fadnavis. He was a former mayor of Nagpur, I think, and they became chief minister. Otherwise, there's not a single leader who emerged. That shows how feeble local governments are. It's our making. It's not the constitution maker's fault. We can change that. One or two other things, if there's any difficulty at a point of time, we can certainly know. Technical issues. Can we create a greater room for fiscal stability? Can the Finance Commission be made a permanent body? These are all technical issues. Nothing precludes us or prevents us from amending the Constitution. But I want the people who think Constitution is what is at fault to understand. You're confusing between the political and administrative process and the Constitution. Constitution is not at fault. The Constitution has not failed us. Our governing elites, both political and bureaucratic, and even judicial, together have failed the Constitution of India. And therefore, we must build a political structure, internal democracy in political parties, a better electoral system, which Constitution allows, by the way, to remove the illegitimate money power in politics, to make bureaucracy more accountable, systems to make them more accountable, and to have fiscal responsibility so that the future is protected. All these within the framework of the Constitution are both necessary and possible. And today, if indeed you want to change the Constitution, if indeed some people have the power to do it, I guarantee you it will be a disaster. Oscar Wilde said, there are two tragedies in life. The first tragedy is not getting what you wanted in life. You love a person, you can't marry, you can't live with that person. You think it's a tragedy. The second tragedy is getting what you wanted in life. Be careful what you want. If indeed you get a new constitution, I'm absolutely certain we have no capacity today as a society to write an elegant constitution.
Why is that, sir?
You see the laws being drafted in the country. You see the constitutional amendments being drafted. The 97th Amendment to the Constitution, in the making of which I played a significant role. I was the one who persuaded those in power to amend the Constitution to give cooperatives autonomy. Look at the Constitution. For the first time, the expression central government finds place in the Constitution. Whenever I see it, my body cringes. Nowhere in the Constitution did we use the word central government. We habitually use it in laws and in bureaucracies or in politician speeches. There's a union government. The citizen is the center of our universe. The Constitution is very mindful of that. Nowhere in the Constitution did they say, original Constitution, central government, but in this wretched thing. Another provision in the 97th Amendment, I'm just giving one example. A law is always subordinate to the Constitution. A rule is subordinate to law. An order of a government or authority is subordinate to rule. The Constitution cannot be subordinate to a law. You know what this 97th Amendment said? Subject to provisions of Banking Regulation Act. Something. Though they put the Banking Regulation Act above the Constitution. That's not the intention. Poor drafting. Substandard talent. They should have said, subject to any law to regulate the banking structure. because fiscal responsibility and bank regulation is important. So even you don't have the elegance to even draft a good document now. And two, it is impossible in today's India to build any kind of consensus. It was a miracle what our leaders have achieved. The left and the right, the north and the south, the Hindi and non-Hindi, the poor and the rich, the upper caste and the lower caste, the Hindu and Muslim, they put them all together. A consensus was built. All of them agreed. Today, in today's politics, in today's India, if you say something is east, I will say it's the west. If you say elections are conducted fairly, I will say EVM is hacked. Do you think there's any possibility of the Indian society and polity coming together and coming up with an elegant constitution? We will tear the country apart. Beware of what you wish. Never. Don't touch it. Yes, any number of changes,
Right.
well thought out, with consensus, will be allowed. We did that. GST came through constitutional amendment.
Right.
All parties came together. A consensus was built. You may criticize occasionally this and that, but it worked. It worked for the country. Don't overburden the constitution, and don't think of rash changes in the constitution. And don't think of rewriting the constitution. It will be a disaster. This country will not be able to survive.
Right. Thank you, sir. That's an emphatic no on writing a new constitution.